Hi, everyone. Welcome to this bonus episode of the Latter-day Disciples podcast. I'm here with my friend Todd McLauchlin, who needs no introduction because he's become so very famous all across the internet these days. It's been on Greg Matson's show a couple of times
Seriously,
now,
that's
which is
my
cool.
intro.
I didn't even know you were on a second time. What?
I said, seriously, that's my intro.
That's your intro. Are you kidding? The first time I asked you for an intro, you said Todd is the guy who loves the gospel. That's all you gave me. So I just gave a better introduction,
There you
or a
go.
more detailed one at least. Anyway, so Todd is participating in the upcoming Isaiah Institute conference, and we wanted to get on and have a conversation, both to let everyone know that you can go sign up to attend. That's a virtual conference coming up on March 30th, 31st, 30th. March 30th. We'll include the link for you guys to do that. He's going to be talking about priesthood as it pertains to the last days. So before that conversation, we thought it would be interesting to get on and just kind of talk out maybe some foundational principles that won't necessarily be extensively covered in his discussion with the conference, but that could be helpful to those of you who are going to attend and kind of have that information later on. Is that a fair introduction?
Yeah, and that's totally fair. We can kind of chat through some preliminary type of ideas.
Yeah. A
That
couple
work.
of disclaimers. Obviously, we're keeping this a little bit more casual. My kids are going to be running around, so please excuse the chaos. But it is life. Also, yeah, this will kind of just be fun. Todd and I are good friends. We're able to talk often, so hopefully
Yeah.
we won't get quite as deep and crazy as we sometimes do in our personal conversations, but maybe we'll share something that's interesting and beneficial. Okay, so let's talk about covenants, Todd. What's your current working definition of a covenant?
Well, I want to be careful not say this is a definition, but maybe there's ways of thinking about covenants that help us frame what's sort of happening. Okay. So I'm not suggesting a whole new theological framework. I'm not suggesting a whole new definition to something that's ancient and understood, but I do want to just like suggest a way of thinking about something that might be really helpful. And if it's helpful to the listener, then wonderful. If it's not, no worries. So so let's start with the idea of like entropy, which is a really great starting point for like any gospel discussion, because entropy, if a lot of your viewers will know what that concept is. Some may not. So, in the spirit of a conversation context, let's kind of just talk about what entropy is really fast, because we can kind of look through that lens and we can like understand a lot of things, including priesthood. And the idea of entropy, well, not the idea, the principle of entropy, is that it's a physical law, but it has a spiritual analog, and it's something like all things are moving from a state of increasing disorder, like from higher states of order to lower states of order or chaos. And um, like, for example, you clean a bedroom and you don't attend to that bedroom, and over time that bedroom is going to decay into chaos. Or you take a tree, that tree will die, that tree will go back into the ground, it will decay. So everything is going from a state of constant disorder, increasing disorder. And you're not sitting in front of the camera, so it's awkward me just to talk into the void.
Sorry, I'm trying to balance all the chaos. Like you have no idea how crazy it is, or like
So,
outside. Anyway.
so everything's entropic. Our whole world is entropic. Okay, so everything is going into constant disorder. Everything's going into death. That's another way of saying that. So spiritually, if we don't tend to ourselves spiritually, we backslide. It's roller skating uphill. If you're not moving up, you're going backwards. Or it's like walking up. It's like walking up a down escalator. If you're not continually walking, that escalator will take you down. Right? Like
Mhm.
my kids love to run up the wrong side of the escalator. It's a great entropy metaphor.
Mhm.
Uh, Spiritually it works, physically it works, and the only way that uh, in physics or in the world, the only way that like something doesn't break down and is not entropic, it's not going into greater chaos at all times, is if there is an exogenous energy source being inserted into it. So the reason why the world doesn't collapse into a cold, disintegrated particles is because you have a sun that's outside of the Earth system and it's inserting energy, and it allows things to consume that energy and to either stall or reverse that entropy. Okay. So you can have life, you can have growth. And so we're born here, and the moment we are born, we start dying, which is kind of a weird way of thinking about it. But the moment you're born, you are now on a crash collision course with death.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to go through a growth in that, but ultimately entropy wins, and your body will eventually go into chaos and it'll go back into the earth. And so what happens we can observe very quickly. So I'm getting towards covenants. Okay. So and what happens in entropy is like you get this order of consumption of creation trying to not go into death. And so like you have the sun that enters in and it goes into the grass, and then you have the bug that eats the grass, and then you have the fish that eats the bug, and you have the bear that eats the fish, and then you have the human that eats the bear. And it's like this, it develops this hierarchy of consumption, right? Like
I don't know any humans that eat bear, but I get,
bear
I
meat is actually a thing, Megan.
it must be a delicacy
Just,
somewhere
just
else.
Google it. You clearly don't listen to Joe Rogan podcasts, so
I don't very often. But the point being that there is a hierarchy, right, that
yes.
disseminates the consumption of the energy. Got
Yeah.
it.
And so in the state of nature, um, the existence of organizational hierarchies is a foregone conclusion. It's something that we can't escape. So you're always going to have established hierarchies. And the one that gets created in a state of nature is a we can call it like a dominance hierarchy. It's like it's the hierarchy of the thing that can feed off the most things that are lower than it, right?
The murder to get gain.
Yeah, like that's the way we're going to kind of frame it is
Yeah.
in order to get gain. So let's take that whole thing and let's kind of like pause it for a second and put it on the shelf, because we're going to come right back to it. And let's start talking about what covenants are. So the idea of a covenant, maybe, let me suggest, is a structure that gets introduced into a system that's going into chaos that does maybe one of two or three things. And a covenant maybe is something that it's light that's introduced, like how the sun is introduced into this world to sustain it, or to let at least persist for a time being, longer than it would naturally.
Mhm.
Covenant is like, one way of thinking about it is like the light of God that gets introduced that either slows entropy or spiritual entropy. It might pause it or keep it stable, or it might actually reverse entropy. It might be able to have a creative increasing effect in a state of being that everything else is going into chaos. Okay.
Mhm.
So one way to maybe, like, I don't know if this resonates with you, but one way I kind of like to think about it is, depending upon the kind of light that you obtain from God is kind of the level of covenant you have, which is sort of like how you're going to relate to the entropic experience of existence.
Mhm.
So let's look at the law of Moses, for example. Well, actually, let's not even, well, yeah, let's start with the law of Moses. So the law of Moses was a law given when Israel rejected the new and everlasting covenant, or the everlasting covenant. And so what it was a law given to them that did not have power in and of itself to bring them to the top of the mount, meaning it did not have salvific power. But it created space for the children of Israel in one dimension that preserved them. And if they were preserved, it might give them time and space to hearken to the Spirit individually and obtain the covenant that could allow them to ascend as individuals, but it wasn't given to them collectively. So what does that look like? Well, he comes and gives Israel a law that says, do X, Y, and Z, and we'll preserve you from your enemies. We'll give you some geography. We will prosper you. And so we're going to stop we're going to slow entropy at a certain level to give you space to breathe. That if you're a Lehi or a Nephi or an Ezekiel or anybody who's hearkening to the Lord in this structure will be given individual opportunity to hearken to the Lord and receive a full covenant of ascension.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what Lehi essentially does. This is what
Mm-hmm.
Nephi does. This is what Jacob does. These early Book of Mormon prophets, these pre-Christ Book of Mormon prophets, it's critical to remember that they all live in a law of Moses dispensation, meaning that the new and everlasting covenant was not given to them or delivered to them or they were not invited into a structure that could actually provide that as a collective people. And so when you have Lehi, and I'm talking into the abyss again, but that's fine. When you have Lehi in Jerusalem in 600 BC, he's living a law of Moses, and they weren't living it that well. Like they were not keeping the law in a way that was going to prevent them from receiving judgment by their enemies. And if they would have been keeping the law, they would have been able to forestall, able to keep off the enemies. So
Mm-hmm.
what Lehi does is he goes and he hearkens to the Spirit of the Lord, as is Nephi, and even Jacob says things like, "Let us not bring down the wrath of the Lord. Let us not bring down his condemnation as the children of Israel did. And let us go forward and receive a perfect knowledge of Christ." And he's delivering this message in a Mosaic dispensation, which is a really interesting thing to do. So like the authorized covenant that was given to the covenant people was only a law of Moses, which gave them power. But everyone, no matter what covenant structure exists, everyone individually is always invited into a fullness.
Mm.
Always.
Yeah.
And so you can kind of say, okay, well, look, with this definition, like what's the first covenant that kind of happens? Well, in a weird way, like building a house is a covenant because you're taking wood and whatever materials and you are organizing them to create space on the ground so your family can go into it, be protected from the entropic elements around it, and it gives them space to live for a time being as they try to live out a full life. It's a covenant structure, very literally. When you have like a country is a covenant. You put a boundary around something and you say, within this boundary, we're going to do X, Y, and Z to maintain order. And anybody who wants to come in here, we get to determine, hopefully, we get to determine what's going to happen. And with the idea that it preserves us as a people.
Yeah.
And so whenever you have a covenant, you create an immediate delineation between order and chaos. There's an immediate line drawn between order and chaos to some degree.
Right. So the thought that I was having too is, by your definition, it seems that mortality itself is a covenant.
It's
From
100%.
the from the understanding that like we come into this mortality with the light of Christ, right? Which is an
Yeah.
initial endowment in spirit that is, it is the God within us, right? It is our spirit plus the spirit, an endowment of that for us to be able to distinguish what is good and what is not, what is true, what is false. And then the bounds of that the bounds of mortality create a probation, right? This is the whole principle that you're talking about, is the principle of a probation, which is a prolonged opportunity wherein hopefully we will receive and eventually accept an invitation to turn around and come into a new covenant structure directly with God.
Yeah. So every level you experience light that comes to you that you can't generate yourself. Okay. That is grace or mercy, and it comes by covenant.
Mm-hmm.
So you're right. Like every soul that's born on this earth, the light of Christ is the superstructure in which they live and they exist.
Mm-hmm.
That's why in D&C 93, we can go to it and look at it. Like I don't have this, I didn't know where.
93.1.
Well, a 93.1's good.
All of
Because
93 is
actually,
good.
yeah, well, 93.1, if you have it in front of you, I can look it up real quick. 931 gives you the path of all covenant, of how to obtain a fullness of covenant.
Yeah, I've got it.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah, that'd be great then.
Verily, thus saith the Lord, it shall come to pass that every soul who forsaketh his sins, and come unto me, and calleth on my name, and obeyeth my voice, and keepeth my commandments, shall see my face and know that I am.
Yeah, that's so
Just keep talking.
no, it's so good. So John, in the record of John, so he gives the preamble. So you just read the preamble. So he's basically saying Christ is the light of the world. Anybody who hearkens to the light within them, whether or not they know that it's Christ, they are going to obtain light that's being offered to them in a spiritually entropic environment. And that's why when we yield to Christ, even if it's like yielding to our conscience, we're yielding to Christ.
Mhm.
Anytime you yield to anything that's good, you're yielding to something that is being offered to you that you don't possess. It's bringing you into something that you don't have yet, right? Like this is the whole idea of like redemption, and that is we come from the presence of God. We are of the Lord, like we are of the Father. We are children of God. But in order for us to obtain light as a part of our being and not just to experience it, we actually have to choose light in a state of nature that makes that light part of us, so we can obtain something that we don't yet have. And this is the difference between us and God, is that God has a fullness of light and there's no darkness in him at all. Therefore, he is a full agent unto himself. Joseph Smith made the delineation and he says that Jesus Christ or God has faith independent in himself, and our faith is dependent faith. So we hearken to the light of truth. That light of truth springs up within us, but it's also a gift that's beyond us. And this is the path of redemption. And so what happens is when we come to the Father through this verse 1 that you read, what we find out is that he is the light within us. So he says, he that the spirit of truth is of God. I am the spirit of truth. And John bore record of me saying, he receiveth a fullness of truth, yea, even of all truth. No man receiveth the fullness unless he keepeth his commandments. And a commandment is like, one way of thinking of that is like light that's being offered to you in a structured way, that as you yield to it, that you obtain the light of that thing. He says, man was also in the beginning with God. So we come from God and we're of the same substance, so to speak. Intelligence or the light of truth was not created or made, neither indeed can be. All truth is independent in that sphere in which God has placed it to act for itself. And this is the fundamental difference between things that are things that are acted upon, that they can actually obtain light. Like a tree can't obtain more light as part of its being, it can just feed off of it. Or like a rabbit can't obtain more light, it just exists in it. But as children of God, we have the ability to actually obtain intelligence through the exercise of agency. So that's why he says, behold, here's the agency of man, and here's the condemnation of man. Because that which was from the beginning is plainly manifest unto them, and they receive not the light. And every man whose spirit receiveth not the light is under condemnation. For man is spirit, the elements are eternal, and spirit and element inseparably connected receive a fullness of joy. So we can keep going, but the point is that Jesus Christ is our Savior and Redeemer because he's also like the superstructure of existence. So he is a Redeemer, like when we read in the scriptures that dost thou know the condescension of God, do you know that God fulfills the full spectrum of reality? So he is a personage of a fullness of a resurrected being, but he also condescends to fulfill and uphold all of existence through an atonement, so that the very structure of all things are held together by his being. So he's a superstructure of reality, but he's also a being in existence that you relate to, that you are of. And so when you die, you don't just get absorbed into the superstructure. When you die, you return back to the God who gave you life, and then you relate to them, and he seeks to give you everything he has, which is to make you a full being that has agency. And the paradox there is no being can be made an agent unless they act in their agency. And so all of eternity is a great structure to allow beings to ascend into the fullness of being in the likeness of their father and their mother. And so we just talked about a lot at once, but like, to back out, what is a covenant? A covenant is the offering of that light. And so what is the new and everlasting covenant? Well, the new and everlasting covenant is to obtain the knowledge or intelligence or the light of truth of God in such a dimension that their spirit interacts in the heavens, in the heavenly abode, as it would on the earthly abode. And therefore they can manifest heavenly things in the earthly realm, which is a level of covenant that is transformative beyond anything we're currently experiencing. So the covenant that's being offered to you at any one time is the structure of light and truth and knowledge that you can obtain that actually changes the very nature of your being, from entropic to non-entropic, or to life. He is the life of the world.
Yeah.
So I just threw up a lot at once, but
It's okay. I was running around like crazy anyway, but I did catch most of that, and I think it's beautiful. It kind of goes along with, a definition that the Lord put in my heart recently for covenant, and I think that this works given with what you just said. But the idea is that the covenant, especially when we think of like the covenants that we make in the temple, right? That these things are designed to train us to observe and keep and live the same laws that God lives. And why I think that works is, and I mean, you can,
yeah,
I don't know, what do you think? Because from what I've
yeah,
heard, again, talking about that it's an acquisition of light, spirit, truth, word, law, those are all synonyms
they're all synonyms. Yeah,
in this thing. And so the acquisition of light, the learning of a law, learning and seeking and understanding, receiving truth, becoming the word. This is all the same thing. What we're talking about is progressing in a transformative covenant pattern by learning the laws that God lives and learning to live them ourselves. And um not just like do your best to keep the law, but as we talked about, there are points of requisite transition where we are changed by reception of grace from the atonement of Jesus
yeah.
Christ that enable us to learn and embody the law.
Yes, that's exactly right. So um, this is such a big topic to bite off that the
Mhm.
chances of us not hitting everything right is like 100%. But
Yeah.
so yeah, let's tackle like a misunderstanding, maybe, or like an incomplete understanding might be a better way of putting it. And that is that like a covenant, God's covenant is like it's like a transformation vehicle. Like,
Mhm.
I'm gonna go make a promise to God to do something. When I do that thing, he makes a promise to me, which means we get in this train together, or this boat, or this car. And as long as I'm in that car, that covenant, it will take me to the celestial kingdom. And therefore I get to go, and anybody who doesn't get with me doesn't.
Mhm. Mhm.
I hope to be clear in a way, but that's not a thing.
Right.
Like, that's a myth.
Right.
Um, what a covenant is a portion of light that, if you are willing to obtain all that the Father has to give you, and you yield to light at the most existential level, the Father has the full ability to give you a transformation in this world. And the transformation is the actual covenant. Like if you don't have the transformation, you don't actually have the new and everlasting covenant.
Correct. And it comes in degrees too. This is a huge misunderstanding that I see all the time is exactly what you were saying. We believe that transformation comes by way of covenant, and it's actually the opposite. It's the covenant that comes by way of our transformation. When we are transformed by
Yeah.
Jesus Christ is
So
when we, by degrees,
yeah,
are enjoying and growing in this progressive covenant.
yeah. So let's talk about the degrees. Like let's like break it down like in a kind of a weird way. Like, okay, so you have a temple. I have a temple that they're building over in our town, and it's four walls that they put in the dirt, and
Mm-hmm.
and it's beautiful, and they create a sacred space.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the beginning of a covenant? Well, yeah. Like they marked out a structure on the earth that they're going to dedicate for the union of heaven and earth. Now, do they accomplish it? That's another question. But it's dedicated sacred space. It's the first step of a covenant. You have a building. You can step into it.
Right.
We're going to do certain things in that building that are going to put us into connection with the divine. And the first thing you might get is like, they might say things like, okay, we want you to keep a law of chastity.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like maybe like the next level of covenant. Well, does keeping the law of chastity save you? No.
Mm-mm.
But at a minimum, the law of chastity puts a structure around you that's going to keep you from entropy at a certain level.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're not going to have unwanted pregnancies. Okay, that's actually a covenant protection at a certain level. Well, if you live more of the light of that thing, you might go into a state of being that says, I want to bond with a wife in a way that creates sacred union. So now I'm going to keep that law at a new level. And if I keep the spirit of that law, it prepares me for a channel of light that has a redemptive effect. And then you might say, well, I'm going to keep that law of chastity in even a higher dimension, which means my whole body is going to yield to the light of sanctification. And that chastity represents my spiritual and physical unity with God. And that chastity has a higher and higher purification dimension. I think actually the law of chastity encapsulates all sanctification. That's a different discussion. And so those laws increase in orders and structures of light until you're prepared to receive all that the Father is willing to give through covenant. So let's step back to this whole the bug eats, the bug eats the grass, the fish eats the bug thing. And what happens in a state of nature is that you can't avoid hierarchies. And so some people like there's political movements, like probably the dominant political movement in the world right now is premised upon this idea that we're going to eradicate hierarchies. Like, and this is obviously a much broader conversation, but like that's like the idea of like declaring a patriarchy and saying we're going to tear down a patriarchy, because what they're really saying is we're going to tear down any type of hierarchy. And I understand the impulse, because the impulse of the hierarchies in the state of nature tend to feed off things that are lower than them. So if you have a government or a corporation, or you have any type of structure that sets up a leadership hierarchy of governance, the chances of the things at the top feeding off of the things at the bottom are almost 100%. Like they're really, really high, even if the impulse of those things that were organized around from the beginning were pure. So you find companies and governments and religions, everything, if they're not going through a state of ascension, of receiving more and more light, then they by default are going into greater and greater structures of dominance hierarchies, where they use those structures to feed off of those that are lower than them. So in the state of nature, we get hierarchies everywhere, and there's political movements and religious movements that are like, well, the hierarchy itself is the problem. And the hierarchy itself is not the problem, because you can never, ever escape them. What we want to do is understand the hierarchy of existence that creates life instead of consuming off of the bottom. And so one way the scriptures describes this hierarchy of consumption is something like murder to get gain. And when we get introduced into the Cain and Abel story, and with the interactions with Lucifer. And when those orders are set up in the very, very beginning, we also have indirect nods to it in the Book of Mormon with the reference of secret combinations and the oaths of the adversary that they sort of like record or talk about in the Book of Mormon. And those orders are murder in the sense of like consuming something below. So and so like the lowest manifestation of murder to get gain might be like somebody who's like in a very, very like unawake state of this covenant. So like if you're a businessman and you have an opportunity to take advantage of somebody and you do so in order to enrich yourself, that is an act of murder to get gain. Like you're consuming something, you're taking it from somebody in order to enrich yourself and put yourself higher, like in a dominance hierarchy. So any type of quote unquote sin, you can kind of like think about it in terms of like a sin is anytime like you're sort of like in a movement of extraction or participation of taking light to get gain somewhere. This is why in D&C 93:39, he says, the evil one cometh and taketh away light and truth through disobedience. It's the way that it's the flow of energy of murder to get gain. And so if you're not going to be active in the redemption of God and his covenant structures, the way that you prolong your life and you advance in a dominance hierarchy is by the consumption of other people. So, a nation does this. A nation left to itself will go into more and more abusive structures of consumption. Religions do this. Like religions that are set up with the best impulses of service and goodness around organizing around a truth, if they don't fulfill the fullness of that truth, inevitably a portion or all of that superstructure will turn and start consuming itself in a dominance hierarchy. It's easy to see in companies. It's easy to see in families. If you have parents who are not in light and truth, they will start to consume their children. They'll start to consume things around them. And so anytime there's a structure of hierarchy, you're either moving in a direction of staving off entropy through murder to get gain, or you're staving off entropy through the Lord's hierarchy. And that hierarchy is inverse to murder to get gain. And it's something like sacrifice in order to bring forth light.
Mm-hmm. Abase yourself.
Abase yourself, like not in a poetic way, like in a real way. So when a mother goes into birth, she knocks on death's door. Like she goes as close to death as you can kind of come in order to bring forth life, and life flows out of her through this sacrificial cycle.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus Christ at our head is the reason why he is the highest in the hierarchy is paradoxically because he had the capacity and the will to go the lowest. Mm-hmm. That's what puts him there. So the hierarchy of heaven, you can of course look at it like this hierarchy of beings because it is. But the way to understand that hierarchy of beings is if you're looking up and looking at those hierarchy of beings above you, anything above you is because it's willing to go lower than you, like lower than you can go, or lower than you're willing to go. And that's where you get the cascading effect of the hierarchy of heaven. The Father goes below them all. The Son is next. Michael is next. In that male order that we can look at. The Noahs, the Enochs, whoever's in those orders, the order of heaven, God's priesthood is a priesthood of a structure of individuals who are willing to sacrifice in order to bring forth redemption and light. So what happens in that superstructure is that it can get infected. Like if it gets established on this earth, and like in D&C 121 warns, if you take advantage for a moment, if you think you can usurp an unrighteous dominion for a moment, you're done. Amen to your priesthood. You're not in this structure. And this structure can return and look very much like the dominance hierarchy in this can look exactly like each other in 1 second. And the dominance hierarchy can like be sort of like this counterfeit, outward looking version of the true thing And it's a satanic trick that happens on this earth, is that we try to make darkness look like light, right? Like they practice the forms, but they deny the power there. And so the temptation is to cast out hierarchies. But the moment you even cast out a hierarchy, that movement of casting something out creates a hierarchy. Like
Mm-hmm.
they're inescapable.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like why a hierarchy is based on the word. Like you brought up the word in the beginning of this conversation. The moment you take a pen and you write a word on a piece of paper, you created a delineation of space and anti-space.
Mm-hmm.
You created a hierarchy,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like
Mm-hmm.
anytime you have a delineation of light and darkness of any degree, you created some type of hierarchy. So dominance hierarchies of murder get gain are delineations of light and darkness one way, and hierarchies of sacrificial orders are light and darkness this way. And thank goodness that Jesus Christ stands at our head, and we worship him because of the price he paid in condescension. The reason why all light flows into his being without compulsory means is because he descended below them all, and all light flows naturally to him as the superstructure of all things because of his sacrifice, a sacrifice that none of us are capacitated to do for ourselves. We must have faith in Jesus Christ, and then his light can flow through us, and it binds who we are eternally, and it connects us to who we are in the fullness of reality in our future selves. And at any one time, we can be bound into the fullness of our eternal selves through the sacrifice and merits of Jesus Christ, who is supreme above all. Like it's contained in his resurrection, the wholeness of all of reality. And that is such a thing to meditate on and to ponder, that we can have faith in his actual existence. Um, and as we do, and as we hearken, we too may desire to draw down light from heaven so that others can experience it. And if we do so with the intent to worship and to glorify Christ, we can do so. If we do so to elevate ourselves in this world and to make something of ourselves, then we instantly move into a murder to get gain. And so the temptation has to remain pure, and that covenant is a true thing. And the question always is, will we fulfill the fullness of that covenant that's offered to us? And so that's kind of like the background of the whole thing. So
That's beautiful. It's a lot. And, the thing that I think about when I think about Jesus Christ and kind of relation to this topic is that exactly what you were just saying, that he is a fullness of this perfect divine upward vertical motion, right? And that he also is a fullness of the horizontal, the unifying, the light, the spirit that is within us and that is in and through all things. You were talking about how all light flows to him. All light also emanates from him. And I think the beautiful thing about Jesus Christ is that he embodies both this vertical, like this masculine structure that you've been talking about. That's what the hierarchy is. It's the masculine side of the fabric of eternity. But he also embodies the feminine side, which is that horizontal dissemination of spirit and light that is available to all of us. And if you put those things together, like if you were weaving something, he is the joint that holds it all together.
yeah, and yeah, and most certainly he has a counterpart that is as divine and and beautiful. And I don't have anything to say about that because I don't really know what to, but I certainly feel in the depths of my soul that all things come together in unity in a way that provides life and light in ways that we just do not.
It's all both. It's all both. Well, and when you were talking about covenant and you kept talking about, sorry, we're talking about a house. You were talking about a space that has to be established for there to be this joining, right? For there to be this balance. Oh, gosh. This interview is killing me. Give me 1 second.
You're fine. One way to think about the temple garment is that when we put on a garment, there's so much controversy around this, and it's really, really sad to me because a lot of people who obtained that covenantal invitation to wear the garment, they reduce it to underwear, and the sacredness of it is really powerful. Like when you encapsulate your body in this clothing, you very much literally are stepping into sacred space. But it's not just that, it's telling you about things that are higher and deeper. And that if you hold that sacred space and you pay attention and you yield your heart, that garment also represents your body and what it will, in the forms it will take, in the purifications and veils,
Yeah.
and you living in veils with the Lord, and the dimensions of that are so far reaching, to take the sacred offering of this garment and to cast it off as if some sort of weird underwear is to really not step into the primary dimension of covenant offering that you're being introduced to. And it's really, I don't know, it's really sad.
Well, and the example kind of going along with that, the example that I was thinking of, the sacred space where heaven and earth meet, where there is this joining of soul and flesh, was a womb. I was thinking about mothers, right? And that they are this sacred space where masculine and feminine meet, where spirit and body meets, and it's woven together. They are weavers in the same manner as Jesus Christ, right? That we're talking about, that he is the joints of the weaves, the meeting of the masculine and feminine, and women serve that role. But how
Mary
do
was a weaver of the veil, right?
Right. And Mary literally was a weaver of the veil, right? Like she served in the temple. She grew up in the temple and was one of the many maidens who wove this massive veil that literally symbolized the meeting of heaven and earth, and passing from one realm into the other. And so when you're talking about this idea of covenant being made in this place, being initiated, you really can see that this whole mortality is a covenant. The covenants that we make in the church are obviously indicative of that, but there's a spiritual side of it, right? Like we have the fleshy side, the physical side is really obvious, and the spiritual side of it is less so. And so there's still a joining that has to be made, and that's made in us, in our hearts. As you were saying, our body is the temple where we should be bringing these things together, where we are not just outwardly indicating, I want to be in a covenant, but we are transforming in the pattern of Jesus Christ, and we are becoming the covenant itself.
Yeah, like if you have to start to understand the fractal dimensions upon which all of these things exist. One way to think about a covenant, I know this is probably throwing out way too much than we have time to unpack, but one way to think about a covenant is anytime the feminine and the masculine come together and they integrate. So that is what creates life. That happens at levels of increasing creation.
Right.
So your spirit coming together into unity with the Holy Ghost, so to speak, or however we want to talk about that.
That spirit, that light, that feminine order of God, yes, of
You're
Christ.
born again on a certain level, right? And then your body coming together into an integration as a sanctification. Then your two spouses coming together in an integration is the next level of covenant that has levels of creation that flow from it. And it keeps going. And so covenants always create.
Right.
And covenants are always integrations of the perfect masculine and the feminine. So this is why you get in trouble really fast. If you have a masculine that's imbalanced, you're out of covenant. If you have a feminine that's imbalanced, you're out of creative covenant. You lose it. Unless you can synthesize and integrate those in perfect harmony, you're not in a creative integration.
Yeah.
So the temptation also is to think of things to collapse it at a certain point. So people say, no, a temple is a temple. Well, no, a temple is sacred space that creation can occur in. Your body is sacred space that creation can occur in. Your spirit is sacred space that creation can occur in. A marriage is like the first religion established was marriage. Like
Yeah.
Adam and Eve out of the garden, getting married was the first religion
Right.
that was established. It's two people having to relate to each other in covenant and
Right.
navigate that unity. That's a religion.
Right.
So yeah, is a temple a person? Yep. Is a temple a temple? Yep. Is a temple a spirit? Yeah, like wherever those integrations are coming together, like you said, the heaven and earth are coming
Right.
together. You have a temple, you have a covenant. And
And
so,
that's
yeah,
part of the hallmarks of truth is when you can see that it works at all of these different levels, from micro to macro. Like you can see it then. But kind of going back to what you were talking about earlier, I hope that this also begins to highlight how detrimental it is when we write off one or the other, when we rid ourselves of the hierarchical or the, I don't have a good word for it, the horizontal threads, the feminine threads,
creation, life, the
creation. Yeah.
yeah,
There are so many people right now that I feel like are leaving the church because they perceive that its hierarchy is incomplete
mhm,
or that it is corrupt in some way. And you can, and not only the church, but as you were talking about, we see this in nations, we see this in families and communities, like you can see it at every level, that it's really hard to find a great representation of the masculine hierarchy right now because we don't have it balanced with the feminine order
yeah,
too.
yeah, and it
And
makes
so
sense
both of
that
those things are
yeah, like it totally makes sense that people want to tear down dominance hierarchies because they are and can be very, very
they're
destructive,
tyrannical. Like
tyrannical.
a corrupt hierarchy, the masculine, the corruption of the hierarchy is tyranny. It is top down oppression, persecution, murder. Like it's all of those bad things, right? So I'm not suggesting that that's what the church is experiencing, but there is this element of imbalance, right?
Yeah,
And people perceive that, and their gut reaction is, well, then it must be bad, and I'm just going to throw it out, and maybe I'll go chase the feminine, which is another problem, right?
yeah,
But you can't do that. Like as wrong as it would be for women to all of a sudden exert dominance over men, right? Which would just be a different
dominance
mass.
hierarchy.
It would just be women chasing the masculine, really,
Yeah,
is what
the
it would
wicked
be.
eating the wicked. Like it's just
Like as wrong as that would be, it is equally wrong to say we need no hierarchy. There is no hierarchy. Like that's just not true. And you illustrated
yeah,
that really well and talking about how all of creation, all of the world illustrates that there is differing degrees of light, but the difference is, am I doing it, yeah, for personal gain, or am I doing it for to sacrifice and to serve?
yeah, yeah. Like Abraham 3 is a chapter of scripture that's dedicated to explaining the hierarchies of heaven. Like
Mhm.
these two facts exist. There are two intelligences, one above the other, and I'm a greater than them all. And intelligence
Right,
is just light and truth.
right.
And light and truth gathers other light and truth to itself. That's the fundamental nature of it. So Christ gathers all light and truth. Anybody who wants to hearken to that greater truth will gather in men and
Mhm.
ascend through Jesus Christ.
Mhm.
Yeah, so like I know we're getting way into the weeds, but I'm gonna throw this out there. It may sound confusing and weird to the audience, but like, like the lower you go down in the covenant structures of God, kind of what it does is like it has less and less salvific power, but it has longer ability to sustain you in this environment.
Right. More probation, less power.
That's more probation, less power. So like if you have like God gives you a full covenant, and let's say the people don't possess it, they don't like obtain all the light of that covenant, the female is drained out of them, like
Mhm.
departs out, like the spirit part, if you want to call it the female, the spirit part. Well, what's left is a framework. Well, that framework has usefulness in that it can stave off entropy for a period of time in hopes that people repent and bring back the feminine into balance.
Mhm.
But if it doesn't, it becomes abusive and corrupting. So, like, this is like the idea of an Aaronic priesthood. An Aaronic priesthood cannot save you, but an Aaronic priesthood can carve out space to invite the fullness of
Right.
the
The
the heavenly
creation, the
creation.
rebalancing of
Yeah,
masculine and feminine, right? Because that's what we're
yeah,
talking about.
So even like if you have a covenant that's degrading or in like serious level of condemnation, and it's being left with sort of like this framework, like these vain forms, these forms without power. The vain forms can kind of be useful for a period of time, that it can kind of like hold space
Right.
for something to happen,
Right.
but they corrupt over time. Like the law of Moses, gives us a couple, I don't know, 1,000 years of space.
Mm-hmm.
Can't save anybody.
Mm-hmm.
Hold space for like a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what happens with covenants, is that like if you don't fulfill them, the Lord can kind of bless you through them because he can kind of hold space for you. It's kind of like when you're like, it's kind of like you were taking your kids to a river and like you want them to swim. So you kind of go out and you take big boulders and you throw it in the water, and it
Mm-hmm.
kind of like slows the water around them. That's kind of a way to think about like covenants on a like super low level, like
Mm-hmm.
low level covenants. It's like it's messy. It can kind of like slow the water around you that you won't
The
drown
telestial.
immediately, but
Mm-hmm.
it won't keep you from like you're still in entropy. You're not in a cell, you're not receiving
Yeah.
light.
Yeah. You can see how like this probation, this lesser law, this Aaronic priesthood lines up with this telestial level, right? This space that we live in, those are the
Yeah.
features that we see. That is the natural degree of light and truth that we have inherited by virtue of entering into the covenant of mortality, right?
Yeah.
And then from there, it's invitations to grow in light and truth through those transformative processes, right? Through the doctrine of Christ is how you take that first step, that justification that transforms you and invites you into the next covenant, which is that sanctification, that reunification of us with God, with our bodies and our spirits, and then eventually with all of us, right? With
All
each
the
individual.
levels of creation and
Right.
ordering.
Right. Well, and with your spouse, obviously, but then the greater, like that's how Zion happens, is it really does start on this individual level. And it's much,
Yeah.
gosh.
Like there's a concern I have because, you know, I- there's a concern where like it's really good to receive prophetic warning of events to happen, like
Mhm.
instructions or things like that. I know people are really, really like obsessed with this eclipse.
Mhm.
I'm not saying they shouldn't be. Like, I think there's so much meaning bound up in it, I think. But
Mhm. Mhm.
what happens is that like my wife and I are having this really great conversation about this. She was bringing this to my attention. Like, it's a really interesting point. Like, it's really easy to like wrap yourself around getting ready for big events that are happening outside of you, like
Mhm.
destructions and preparing and you should prepare to the degree that is like within the bounds of like the spirit in your guidance. But like what it what it oftentimes does is it takes people's attention away. It's a really convenient way to like not address the like Armageddon inside of you, like the destruction in you. Like
Totally.
if you're not like if you're not doing the really, really hard work of looking at your own shadows, like looking at your own darkness and not yielding your full heart, that it's really easy to get distracted with things that are important, but not that important. Like
Right.
nothing's more important than getting up and reconciling yourself to God,
Right.
and then looking like holding your child, and like serve,
Mhm.
serving breakfast cereal and cleaning up milk and looking in, connecting with your children and bringing light and then living in the beauty of this world, like
Right.
and living here and not always trying to escape because you can't manage the reality of your existence and you're always looking for like the earthquake to come and wipe everything out, and that can get
Right.
to occupy your attention in a way that keeps you from loving and living and being really, really present and like true facing the depths and of your soul that need to
Right.
be given to God.
Right. Well, and we do it in the opposite way too, is that we love to talk about the idea of Christ coming, right? Like his second coming on the mount. We love to talk about the millennial day, not realizing that that opportunity is available to us right now. Like we don't have to wait for him to come to this external space. We can work to have him come to us now, and that is a fullness of covenant. That is a full reception of light and truth, because he is light and he is truth. And so, I think you're so right. It's so easy to project and be distracted by all these things that are happening outside of us, instead of taking accountability for the covenant that we could have. And if I really feel like if you're not working in the covenant that you have currently received and improving upon it, then you will be subject to the covenant of the people around you. And that is a covenant of destruction. That is a covenant of hell that we live in this telestial space.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, this telestial world, the covenant of grace here is that the light of Christ flows through everybody and, is emanating in the hearts of like all people.
Mhm.
And it is a call inward and outward, right?
Yeah.
Like it's a call inward to like bring all of the parts within you into the presence of God, into the light of Christ, into unification, into sanctification, and then you live outwardly.
Yeah.
You draw light outwardly. Like it's this beautiful balance of inward and outward,
Yeah.
you know, creation and structure. And it's like the river that the boundaries are masculine, like, because it channels, but the water is the feminine. And you take the water out and you just have a dry, dead riverbed.
Mhm.
You take the masculine out and you have chaotic destruction of flooding, like,
Yeah.
right? And really that's just like those are the two warring things that we have. We have the masculine trying to like usurp dominion and unrighteous dominion, and you have some aspects of the feminine who are wanting to burn the whole thing down,
Yeah.
and
I've I've used this phrase a couple times lately when I've talked to Todd, and it's a phrase that God has put on my heart, and I feel like it relates to this so much, is that we like to look at life as black and white, right? We want to look at the good and the evil, and we want to claim the good and eschew the evil, or what we can't see, what we can't perceive. And the more that I learn about God, the more that I realize that God lives in the gray. But what we don't understand is that God sees 10,000 colors where we just see gray. And I really think it's this illustration of God is not just one thing or the other. God is a perfect balance in all of these things. And that's what a covenant is inviting us to do, is to become balanced internally with God and in our relationships with our family, and then broader. And then that balance is what establishes Zion. That balance is what unites us in a kingdom of light and truth with one another, not just choosing, not just, going so whole hog after just the masculine or just the feminine. Like, it's really bringing together both.
yeah. Yeah, amen. This is such a broader discussion to have, and
Yeah.
there's so much to unwrap and explore, and I'm certainly not capable of doing that. There's people who I feel like are so tuning into this in a way that I think is going to be very powerful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but the bottom line is when push comes to shove, what do you do on a Wednesday morning? And I think it's something like you get up and you recognize God and you do everything you can to bring your heart into willful alignment and reception of light,
Mhm.
and that you gather, and you go inward and you allow yourself to really look at those dark places that you might be hiding and pushing away and don't want to
Right.
confront, and those deep fears. You invite it all into the light, and then you get up and you hold your kids and you go to work and you live outwardly and straightforwardly in the world with light, and you invite light everywhere and love, and you participate and you don't hide away,
Yeah.
um and you fully participate in the light and love of this world so that you enjoy. I mean, we're
Mhm.
we're not here to be eat, drink, and be merry, but we're here to fully worship God through the love of his creation,
Yeah.
and that's beautiful. That's different than like the eat, drink, and be merry. Let's consume everything we can because we're dying.
Right.
That's murder to get gain.
Right.
No, let's love creation and let's participate fully in every aspect so that that earth becomes heaven. I mean, anyway, I'm
Yeah.
rambling.
No, I love that. Well, and I was thinking kind of the same thing when you're talking about what do you do on a Wednesday morning and how do we live life? I think that we live life by learning to acknowledge and honor the God within us, the spirit, the light and truth that we've been given, and use it to turn around and worship the God without of us,
Yeah.
right? The God that we see in each other, the God that we are all a part of, and most especially the gods above us, right? The gods that are in this hierarchy because they have descended below all things on our behalf.
Yeah. Call upon the name of Jesus Christ and live by every word that proceeds from his mouth. And he will connect you to your deepest true self, and he will connect you to each other, and all of existence comes together in him. And
Yeah.
yeah.
And he holds it all together. He holds it all together. Well, thank you, my friend. This was fun. I hope people were able to get something out of it and not be completely distracted by my children. I'm glad you were able to talk through the pauses. Sorry to make you speak in the void.
I enjoyed talking with you. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.